Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope your day's going well. It's me again. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time with some thoughts on a federal perspective regarding the measurement of welcoming communities integration. I don't pretend to have a silver bullet, but I wanted to feed you some information, provoke some discussion, and let you know where this domain is headed from the federal perspective. I think it will be relevant to a lot of you, and I hope you can get something out of it. And it would, like I said, we'd welcome the discussion at the end. I think that's where the richness comes from. And I'm actually here to hear more from you and learn perhaps than I can offer you at the end of the day. So selfishly, I would look forward to your best practices and lessons from the trenches. This is a very important slide, I think, and to paint the current federal government picture, IRCC. What we're looking at currently in terms of performance measurement and results, and it's really important because I feel like it's going to trickle down to the settlement community and to the LIPs and to the sector in a way that you might not have experienced before, and a bit of a wave you'll see coming if you haven't already felt it. Just to drill down on the fact that performance measurement information, outcomes-oriented information has really come to the forefront of the federal government's agenda. You've probably heard about deliverology by now, and the Trudeau government brought in Matthew Mendelson to bring in the results delivery unit. They're really pushing this down to right to the program level in federal departments. Outcomes, stressing outcomes, results. What are Canadians getting for their investments? What are the programs delivering? What are we setting up for expectations in terms of what the programs are doing and how are we doing towards achieving those? We have to take stock more often. We have to know what our indicators of success are. All of these things might not be new to people. You know, we might say old news 10 years ago in the federal government or wherever you might be. You might have heard of results-based management. Maybe this is just a cat of a different color, but I think the difference is that it's received attraction at the highest level. I can just let you know that, for example, our minister, this is our highest official, has gone to cabinet several times to report on results and outcomes of certain initiatives, and this is the language being used in the federal government all the way to fireside chats with Justin Trudeau. So this is going to make its way down to your worlds if it hasn't already. And practically speaking, I'm going off script a little bit here, but you think about funding submissions and proposals. I can tell you I was at a meeting just 2 days ago where our deputy minister wants to know how we're measuring outcomes both for service providing organizations and contribution agreements, in addition to the client side that I talked about. I'll talk about a little bit here. So this is really something we all have to face together, and I hope to offer you some perspectives that might help you along that path. Okay? So I think that covers a lot of the first slide. I would also add that the timeliness of reporting and outcomes measurement is even more prominent than before. It's not waiting for an evaluation to come every 3 or 4 or 5 years, even maybe not annual performance or partnership reports. This kind of information's got to be more real. And the flip side of that, of course, and I'll get to that in challenges, is availability of data, and you're all going to come at me, ask for some more data, just like this morning. And I'll do my best to help. But there is a need and a hunger there that hasn't been there before, and that's going to continue to grow, I think. And that's really what my blue arrow is pointing to. It's all converging on that kind of idea. In terms of what IRCC is doing, results, measurement, outcomes, evaluation, that's my bread and butter. That's what I do for a day job. But we also are strengthening our performance measurement function in the department. We're dedicating more resources to it. By that I mean people, dollars, experience where we can to beef up that ability to tell results and outcome stories. We're investing more in data development, linking databases, again, to enrich in what is available out there that expands on what our story of our programs is. And of course, we are doing the regular evaluations as per Treasury Board policy and based on good management. And we have to know how things are doing. So just to highlight for you that we are doing our famous settlement program evaluation. The OLMC's evaluation is underway, which includes LIPs and RIFs. And of course, that doesn't even get into settlement selection programs like provincial nominees, federal skilled workers, and other hot topics of interest, which I can tell you about later if you like. When you think of measuring outcomes, challenges, maybe I should start with the positive, but there are things to overcome. And you think about, first up, how do we define success? And this is where I always stress coming back to first principles. What are we trying to achieve? Ask the so what questions. Maybe that's my evaluator hat. But defining the intended outcomes is a starting point for us when we think about achieving results and reporting on those outcomes. We have to push ourselves collectively beyond outputs and activities. I realize and I agree in the value of reporting on establishing, let's say, LIPs, for example, and there's a lot of administrative building blocks to put in place. So moving to the next phase, those are equally important, and the foundation, the process is just as important. But now, so what? Why have we done all this? Is there some kind of immigrant outcome or newcomer perspective that we need to try to influence, or behavior, or something in terms of seamless service delivery, or things like that just sprout to mind. Moving just beyond, did we establish a council? Do we have a plan in place? Those are very short-term, very finite, very binary. And we did it, we didn't do it, we're on time, on budget, we've met a critical mass for membership and what have you. So what is the question I would put back to people out there, and linking what that funding truly is intended to do at the end of the day. Another challenge, of course, you're familiar with it, is defining integration, not just success. So once we have an objective, an expected outcome, a result, and I often use these terms synonymously, is the facets of integration and success, and there are many out there. My advice here would be to draw on existing sources of established data or definitions. Statistics Canada, Stats Canada has got a wealth of things. You look at OECD countries and OECD reports, always a valuable tool, and we try to do that. Australia's got a great integration and immigration model that we often try to pull from, and things like that, in addition to networking with peers and the academic and research community. So that's a good thing, but also at the same time maybe a definitional challenge. So landing on what the successful facet of integration or facets would be is another place to start when you go on that outcomes measurement journey. And of course, true outcomes, impacts take time. Our ministers and deputies and senior officials are asking for results data all the time. So we do have to push back from the evidence guys and say, well, you're not going to see a change in labor market integration over 6 months. So integration is a process. It's a journey. It's a continuum. People get here, newcomers in disarray, the upheaval, situations of duress. They're not going to jump into the labor market or be immediately integrated into a new community. So realizing that, messaging that properly is important, and I think if you set expectations early, that helps. There are milestones along the way. There's indicators. They show you're on your way to a successful integration and measurement, but it does take time. So I do feel setting that bar appropriately from the beginning is important. Naturally, indirect results, what a LIP can achieve, for example, versus a direct service delivery like language training are different things. Understanding that and fighting the attribution challenge. Even we recognize this, of course, at IRCC and in the evaluation community and measurement community, and people are moving towards contribution less than attribution these days. There are too many intervening factors to definitively pin often result on a program or intervention or some activity. So contribution, what have I done towards that a plausible person would agree, yeah, you've made a difference by doing what you've done. So you can keep that in mind and maybe rest a little bit assured that not everything hinges on something you might be accountable for by yourself. And that speaks to those contextual factors I'm just noting here. And again, there's a plethora of tools out there, or maybe a lack of. I'm not sure, I don't pretend to know everything, but there's no standards necessarily. I think picking what works for you as a starting point is a good place. Now, setting the stage, and how do we go about this? And these are just some reflections from the field, from our experiences on the work we've done in evaluation, and PM is really understanding those intended outcomes from the outset and expected results, and pushing ourselves, as I said earlier. Logic models, results chains, delivery chains, these tools you might have heard of are very useful in articulating what you're trying to achieve with the causal relationships and the expected outcomes that you want to get out of it. And I've appended as an annex the LIPS theory of change, the RIF logic model, our settlement program logic model as examples for you as takeaways. But always a good ground zero to start from. Okay, we've set ourselves up to try to achieve something, those expected results. Where do we go from here to assess that? So I believe in that first principle, and it's a great place to realize, my program or design or my approach might need some rethinking, but this is how I'm going to assess what we wanted to do. This is selfishly a departmental perspective, but we really feel like client outcomes is more and more important than ever before. We have a nice split in the department between operations and policy and programs. You can't do one without the other successfully. But at the end of the day, it's about newcomers, it's about people, clients. So we're really pushing that direction, and you're going to see that requirement being pushed down, I think, to service providers and the contribution agreement world and the funding world more and more from the federal perspective. I can't speak for the other funders out there, but what difference have we made in clients' lives? Not just have we, filled 20 seats with language learners, or have we brought together X, Y, and Z partners? There is a difference to be made, and how do we account for that? How do we describe that story is where we are pushing ourselves. That's being asked of us. That's what the government is focusing on. So you do have to keep that in your sort of scope looking forward. I think multiple lines of evidence goes without saying to those who are research-oriented. You want to try to triangulate your findings by coming up with different evidence that hopefully converges, or maybe it does have a discordant story, but it tells you something in that as well. As I hinted at in our LIPS preliminary presentation this morning, we tried to tackle it from different ways, and I'll highlight that in the next second again as a refresher. Bring the counterfactuals into play, as I said this morning as well. What would happen if something didn't exist, or if this program wasn't there, or if we didn't do activity X? What are the gaps that it's addressing? And kind of look at it from a different perspective. Comparators are always great. We think of economic outcomes, and we do this a lot in our department, average earnings, income, things like that, social assistance uptake. What is the Canadian average? What are other populations doing? How do you dissect that within a cohort or over a time period? So looking at it different ways by comparison brings something to the story that you might not know, and it also helps you account for blips or contextual, economic, or other factors. And look for proxies. You might not have a direct indicator data source, but you might have something that speaks to it in a general way that helps you tell the story. And this is of utmost importance, is focus on critical indicators. A performance measurement principle in my mind is begin with what you have, existing data sources, existing indicators, and don't be stuck with analysis paralysis. You could try to find the perfect framework, the perfect set of approaches and theoretical data or models. There's something to be said for that, but to hit the ground with data and meaningful outcomes information right away, start with what you got and build from there. And then you refine, reflect, and how do you improve that every time, every cycle? And I think that is part of a learning organization. That's a best practice for any business or any nonprofit or any organization, and we look at ourselves the same way. And I do want to stress here, qualitative research and findings and approaches are super important, especially in an indirect service or a LIP world or welcoming communities world. I think numbers will only take you so far. I think there's a story that underlies that, and this is why we went out ourselves in the field to really get on the ground and see and do focus groups with those most touched by the interventions, or understand what is affecting one geographical area versus another, and bringing that to bear, supplemented by the data, by other forms. A survey is super helpful. You can ask very direct questions. You can have open-ended questions, and that's a mix of qualitative, and then you sort of look at your results and tabulate those and cross them and all that stuff. But I think you would want to balance both kind of approaches, the softer and the harder, if you permit me to say that. And part of this conference speaks to my next point. Best practices are out there, or better practices, or new innovations, or other ways. I think we should always keep learning. And like I said, I would hope to hear from some of you now, later, in the future. And we had lots of great input during the LIP evaluation from people who are doing things in different ways that we wouldn't think of. And I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all or any silver bullet, as I said. So I talked about that. And this is kind of a pep talk message, is embrace the imperfect information out there in the fluid environment. We deal with this all the time in the federal government. We might not seem that exciting, but at the same time, our programs move and shift. Our constituents, our interests, our priorities change. Many times I've gone out in the field for an evaluation and the program is in flux at the same time, and we're battling that. If you can come to grips with that and understand that we're taking a snapshot in time, we're going to continue to refine our approaches, we're going to come back for another measurement cycle, you'll be better off, and you won't kill yourselves trying to find that perfect antidote for everything. Now, getting more to the brass tacks, and you heard some of this at the LIPS evaluation presentation this morning, but we started, and you'll see I'm following my own principles, walk the walk. We did start with the LIPS theory of change. So we had set out together with this community and others what we're trying to achieve through a LIP. So we started there, and how do we assess those questions? And we looked at a very targeted set, and I've included a graph on the next page to show that we really whittled it down to the essentials in terms of indicators and key questions, and try to burrow down on those. We, of course, use those multiple lines of evidence I've already mentioned. And I think a big thing here is being nimble on the fly. I'm going to show you our matrix and sort for the visuals. You'll get the slides later. This was our evaluation matrix, and it's a tool we use. We've got your evaluation questions in the dark blue. There's only 5 or 6 of them, as you can see. Really focus on the core issues we want to answer. and you can read them at your leisure. And one of the ones we really wanted to know about was, to what extent have LIPs improved the accessibility of services for clients within their communities? We ended up focusing on that more than anything else during the evaluation. And you see some indicators and possible data sources. So this was our first cut at a framework. What happened was we get out in the field and we start to say, whoa, it's not as easy to measure this as we thought. We've got some information, some better ways to approach it. So we scrapped some of these approaches, and we took that flexibility and learned on the fly, and then we drilled down to what we thought was most important. So I come back to the idea of what are we trying to assess and what's the best way to get there? Well, we stopped and we did some reflection and said, hey, it's got to go this way, not the other. And lastly, I will leave you some thoughts and considerations, and I'm happy to get down into more detail if we have a chat or offline. But bring that evaluative thinking, that critical assessment, as I said, move to outcomes and results orientation. The next phase of what we're trying to achieve is something to keep in mind as we go forward, as LIPs mature, as well can communities become more involved, there's more players. I think, what is the true benefit downstream that we're trying to together work towards? And I just would say too that outcomes can cut across levels or jurisdictions. It's not related to just federal or one group. I think we have to think broadly, and who's the unit of analysis? Is it the client and what they're getting, or the newcomer? Possibly. It should be the focus, maybe. And I think it goes without saying, I'm not going to pretend this is easy. Measurement and outcomes, results, ongoing monitoring takes time, energy, resources, dollars. You can have a Cadillac model that can work well. I think of somebody like Peel and their data center. Not everybody can do that. A gentleman last year from Peterborough, I believe it was here presenting with me on measurement approaches. He was a one-man shop or a two-man outfit, and he developed his own logic model and found his best approaches. So it can be done from either end of the spectrum, and I'm kind of encouraging you to embrace that. You don't have to hire somebody necessarily, but you do need to build it into your way of doing business. It's not side-of-the-desk work anymore, and I don't think it can be. And I'm taking that lesson to heart at our evaluation and performance measurement shop, the same way that you should consider that. We are entertaining, in fact, in our department, building more allowances for that in contribution agreements for research, reporting, performance measurement, and evaluation in terms of allocating what's available under the terms and conditions. So just to give you a little glimmer of hope that we recognize the importance of this as well at IRCC. And always bring that context to your story. It enriches it, obviously, and it explains those variances. You know, we have to tell the story, warts and all, and sometimes things don't work out as intended, or you don't hit your targets or whatnot. But there is an explanation or a contextual factor to bring to bear. So with that, I would leave you to bring some of your promising practices forward to the table. I did want to just leave a thread here to close a thread from this morning, a little bit for people, a little bit off topic, but I got a lot of questions about data. Indulge me for a second here. Many of you might not know this, but there's an open data portal for the federal government. I posted the link here and I brought some handouts. We in the department have been pushing a ton of data into a public space. This is accessible to anybody. And we have many IRCC immigration data sets available to you, to anybody, to researchers to access in Excel formats and others that you can manipulate. So I hope you can leverage this in terms of what I talked about, data availability and getting to some of those outcomes. It's a lot there, and just for an example, and I'm just plugging this because I think it's a super valuable resource that's under-advertised, so I'm doing my part right now. We've got Syrian information in there in terms of arrivals and resettlement and settlement services. We have iCare data up there, folks. We have temporary resident data, permanent resident data. We do it by CMA, so down to the postal code level. You think about things like that. There's a wealth of information available to you, and I'm not even touching on everything. We've got refugee information there. We have express entry, for those of you know what that is. Our facts and figures, visitors, temporaries. It's just unimaginable right now, and we're going to continue to push more to get it in the hands of the people that can use it. So I'll stop there with a little plug, and hopefully that excites you a little bit, something you can work with. Bring that back to your research, folks, and I welcome some comments and thoughts after.